Hi, this is an introduction to white paper number 18, the last of our white papers, and it's on movements. City to City has always been about not just planting a church here or there, but starting movements in cities. City movements, we sometimes call them, citywide movements, citywide impact we want to have. But the word movement is very popular, very positive, at least in the English language right now. Young people want to be part of movements and social movements, but defining it and maintaining it and recognizing the limits or dangers of it, very important. So in this paper, we talk about all those things. So let me just give you an introduction at a high level. First of all, let's just talk about what we would say would be the marks of a movement. We're not talking about movements in general. There's lots of movements, but we're talking about gospel movements, which overlap with other movements. So let me give you these particular traits. First of all, a gospel movement has the gospel at its core, which means gospel renewed lives. Now, I can't recapitulate all of white paper number 1 and white paper number 2 and even 3 and 4, which are all about gospel and gospel renewal. But the gospel produces a unique energy in a human heart, a unique energy in a human community that comes from the glad surrender that comes when you recognize grace, when it comes from an identity change where you become a child of God and you're not seeking to earn your own justification and salvation anymore, but resting in Christ and all that. And that creates an energy all by itself that is dynamic. And we would say that the movements, frankly, a lot of social movements are generated by its main emotion is anger. Let's face it. And maybe sometimes it's rightful, because some movements that are seeking to rectify injustices, I can imagine the anger is justified. Nevertheless, the gospel movement is not a movement that is mainly motivated by the emotion of anger, but the emotion of joy and gratitude, grateful joy. Number 2, and this is where it starts to look like, all other kinds of movements. Number 2, movements are always really animated by a vision. What matters is not the rules or a lot of other things, it's the vision. We've got a vision for the future. We've got a vision for what we want to accomplish. So a compelling, specific vision is crucial to movements. We see a future like this. We see a future like this. The abolition movement back 150 years ago would say, we envision a world without slavery. And that's what we're trying to bring about. See, that's a vision. And it's a compelling vision, and it's an infectious vision. So movements are based on the gospel and gospel renewed lives. Number 2, gospel movements have a compelling vision. So if a gospel movement is happening in your city, it's got a vision for your city, and not just more churches, but a vision for what you're hoping to see in the city, what you're hoping to see in your churches even. Not just, we just want to grow more, we want to just do more of what we've always been doing. No, where are you going? There needs to be a vision. Number 3, shared leadership. Now, what I mean by shared leadership is rather than a very hierarchical, top-down kind of structure, movements tend to be much more collaborative. Movements mean that even the leaders who are the leaders are much more open to listening to other people and to sharing leadership. And there's 2 really, really good reasons why shared leadership works so well in movements. The one reason, of course, is that if you are willing to share leadership, no one person has all the gifts. That's all there is to it. No matter who you are, no matter how gifted you are, nobody's got all the gifts. And when you have shared leadership, people bring different gifts. And people bring different resources. And the more you're able to share, the more you're able to bring all those resources to bear. But if you don't share, if you're just saying, I'm the leader and I'm doing everything my way, when that happens, then of course what goes on is you only have your gifts and you only have your resources and not others. Another reason for shared leadership, though, it's motivating. The super top-down kind of leadership structure, people in a sense do their job because they have to. It's out of duty. It's also they want benefits. It's also there's a little bit of fear because they don't want to get cited or they don't want to get a bad report. But in shared leadership, the idea that, hey, people are listening to me and I really own this thing and my fingerprints are on this thing, it's just motivating. It's motivating. It's what makes movements dynamic. So gospel renewal, compelling vision, shared leadership. Then after shared leadership, innovation and risk. Now that's true of all movements. All movements are very open to innovation, creativity. Then number 5, reproducibility. Now that's kind of an interesting thing. 12-step movement. The 12-step movement was a movement because you didn't have to study 1,000 books in order to understand what 12-step was about. You could, because 12-step movements, helping people out of addictions, certainly there was plenty to study. But once you once you saw the page in which the 12 steps were there, and an explanation of the 12 steps were there, and maybe if you went through it once, you could just pick up and go do your own group. You didn't have to ask anybody's permission. You just did it. And movements work better, and the movement dynamics are stronger when a lot of the things you're trying to spread are fairly reproducible and not too complicated, too complex. You've got to be able to put the gospel in nutshells. You've got to be, in spite of the fact that it's of infinite depth, you've got to find ways of discipling people in the gospel that can be reproduced. So let's just say it's the gospel renewal, vision, shared leadership, innovation and risk, and reproducibility. These are all things which are absolutely crucial to creating a dynamic movement. But second, dangers. Movements have in them the seeds of their own destruction. This is the reason why no movement lasts forever. One, of course, is that movements are so visionary that they actually don't get down to earth, they don't become practical. They're so visionary that they actually don't really spend the time saying, well, how are we going to get there? You know, it's one thing to say, you know, give money to me because I'm for cleaning up the environment. And I've got a vision for a world in which there's no pollution. And okay, how are you going to get there? I mean, that's the devil's in the details. And that often happens with movements, is that they start off very excited and very exciting, and they gather a lot of people. But then when it comes to actually getting something done, the vision doesn't get practical. Number 2, there's a problem with accountability in movements. That is to say, very often people come together. Like I said, there's not a real strict top-down formal structure. People love how organic it is. People love how it's all spontaneous. Remember Occupy Wall Street? People were just coming together, and there was no membership, and there were no rules, and there weren't not even any leaders. They were there because they had this common vision, and we're going to protest. And then, of course, what happens is there's no accountability. Then there's crime that happens. There's people that come into your movement that you actually don't have any control over because you don't like controlling things, and they're bad people, or they do bad things. And very often there's a lack of accountability. Thirdly, innovation and risk. Remember, here's the problem. Sometimes the movements are so prone to risk that they explode because they take such huge risks that when the risk does not pay off, it just destroys. And then finally, reproducibility can lead to being simplistic. An emphasis on reproducibility can be so strong that your movement actually doesn't really have any kind of depth to it. And this is the reason why, here's the last thing to talk to you about, why in the end we do need institutions. So if, for example, Redeemer comes here, and in the very beginning we were very, very dynamic, and we plant churches, and this is like, I'm thinking about 1989, 1991, that sort of thing. A lot of people start to say, you know, if Christians are going to stay here and if new people are going to come here, some of them are going to want a Christian school. And so out of Redeemer came institutions like Geneva School, even though it's not controlled by Redeemer. Out of Redeemer came a Midtown Pregnancy Center now called Avail. Again, when I say out of Redeemer, meaning individuals. Out of Redeemer came Hope for New York. Out of Redeemer came Redeemer City to City. Out of Redeemer comes Redeemer Counseling Services. And what these things are actually institutions. They get boards, they get budgets, they get, you have to have rules. But what they have is staying power. And they create durability. And there's a great danger with all institutions, which you can call institutionitis. Because institutions value tradition. Institutions actually do not like change. They're there for the long haul, so they make change harder. Institutions are more structured. They try to be, you might say, structured enough that they can just be passed on from person to person, leader to leader, generation to generation, without being radically changed every time they fall into the hands of another person. And one of the things that's so important about institutions is they do last, especially if they stay healthy. But the danger of institutions, just like there's dangers for movements, the danger of the institution is that it becomes unable to change when the times change. And also when it actually cares much more about just keeping itself going than about actually getting good done. When people just get much more concerned about their jobs and their benefits and their salaries and their power and their turf, and they don't really care about the overall good of what the institution is doing. So what does this mean? And here's how we'll conclude here, actually. What this means, and this has been in the book Center Church, and this is in the white paper too, is that in general, what we want to do in City to City is we want to start gospel movements, and we're going to keep calling them movements. But the movements, if they're going to last, have to have some institutional aspects to them. We have to carefully introduce institutions or new institutions like the ones I just mentioned. In some ways, one of the things that keeps a church planting movement going in New York City are many of the institutions that came out of the church planters, like the ones I just mentioned in New York. So you need not only a mixture of dynamic new movements and churches, but you also need institutions. But even your movement needs to be, to some degree, institutionalized. You can't change your vision every 5 months. You can't change your personnel every 6 months. And at a certain point, people get exhausted with the change. That in the beginning is exciting. When a movement gets started and every 3 or 4 months they doubled and they do this and they do that, but at a certain point it becomes exhausting. So basically what we'd say is we want you to be movements with institutional aspects to them, your movements. We want you to be movements that also appreciatively spin off institutions that are very movement friendly. That's not easy. And the rest of the paper talks a little bit about that, but it's really the sort of thing that we need to be sharing across the continents, across the various regions, because in every continent that sort of movements look somewhat different. In every city they look a little bit different, but we really need to be sharing with each other because there is a lot of exciting things going on. Thank you very much for listening.